I just wanted to paint my front door navy blue. Instead, I uncovered forged documents, fake signatures, and a power-hungry HOA president who thought she was above the law. What started as a simple request ended in handcuffs. Hers, not mine. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We post gripping real-life drama every day, and you'll want to stick around until the end of this story. Justice does get served. I never imagined a can of navy blue paint would spark a legal battle, but that's exactly how this nightmare began. It started innocently enough. After a long, gray winter, I wanted to freshen up the front of my house. A fresh coat of paint on the door, something classic and refined. I chose navy blue, not too loud, perfectly matching the shutters. Before doing anything, I checked the HOA guidelines. They mention that front door colors must be tasteful and complementary to the home's exterior. No specific color list. So, following protocol, I submitted a formal request to the Homeowners Association along with the color sample. I honestly thought nothing of it. 3 days later, I got the email. Subject line: Violation notice, unauthorized color selection. All caps. Signed by Karen Wilkins, our HOA president. She claimed my chosen shade was too bold and disrupted the neighborhood's aesthetic harmony. Instead, she offered me a list of approved tones, all some variation of beige or gray. That's when I realized this wasn't about taste. This was about control. I politely pushed back, noting that her list of colors didn't exist in any official documentation. Her reply was curt, nearly smug. The board has discretionary authority on aesthetic matters. Your request is denied. That line sat with me. Discretionary authority? I reread the bylaws. Nothing in there gave her or the board that kind of sweeping power. So, I requested a formal hearing. That's when things started to get strange. The hearing was mysteriously postponed. Twice. The third time, it finally happened, but the moment I sat down, I felt something was off. Karen presented a printed, amended bylaw that allegedly banned all bold colors for the past 5 years. The problem? The fonts didn't match. One page looked crisp and white, like it had just come off a printer, while the rest looked aged and yellowed. I asked to review the amendment more closely. Karen brushed me off. The board, clearly under her thumb, unanimously denied my request again. But I wasn't backing down. Not this time. I reached out to Tom Redford, the former HOA president who'd retired and moved to Florida. When I asked him about the color restriction amendment, he was baffled. We never passed anything like that, he told me. We actually argued against color restrictions. Couldn't agree on what was acceptable. That was my first real lead. I went down to the county records office. All HOA documents are legally required to be filed there. What I found only deepened the mystery. The original covenant was on file, no amendments, no restrictions beyond the vague, tasteful and complimentary phrasing. Karen's supposed update? It didn't exist. It wasn't just an overreach. Something deeper was going on. I brought my findings to 2 other board members. They looked nervous. One of them stammered. Karen's probably just behind on filing. She's very organized with documents. But something in his voice told me he didn't believe it either. I sent a formal letter to the full board requesting clarification. 3 days later, I came home to a certified envelope taped to my door. Inside was a list of alleged violations, misplacing garbage bins, unauthorized landscaping stones, and, most bizarre, excessive holiday decorations in April. April. I hadn't even decorated. And the fine? $900. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was personal. And I was done playing defense. I stood in my living room holding the violation notice, heart pounding with a mix of disbelief and fury. This was no coincidence. Karen Wilkins was retaliating. And not even subtly. The charges were absurd: trash bin placement, imaginary holiday decor, unauthorized landscaping. All within the span of a week? It was obvious she was trying to bury me in bogus fines until I gave up. But she had no idea how stubborn I could be. I took detailed photos of my property that same day. No garden stones out of place. No trash bins blocking anything. Certainly no festive garlands lighting up April. I filed a formal appeal. Then, things escalated. Instead of acknowledging my response, Karen filed for an injunction against me. She accused me of ongoing harassment of the board and disruption of HOA operations. But it didn't stop there. Included in her submission were signed affidavits from my next-door neighbors, the Johnsons. According to these statements, I'd been hostile, combative, and refused to comply with multiple HOA directives. But I knew something she apparently didn't. The Johnsons had been on a 3-week European cruise. The affidavits were dated right in the middle of their vacation. I called them the moment I saw their names. They were horrified. Not only had they never signed anything, but they'd also had zero contact with Karen while away. "We'll help however we can," Mrs. Johnson promised. "This is outrageous." That's when I realized this wasn't just HOA overreach. This was fraud. I contacted an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Laura, and when I showed her the emails, documents, and amended bylaws, her face darkened. "This isn't just civil," she told me. "This is criminal. Forgery. Document tampering. Possibly identity theft. We're going to court." Laura filed a countersuit against both the HOA and Karen personally. She included every piece of evidence: my photos, the original county records, the Johnson statement, even a letter from the former HOA president. The judge, Marcus Rivera, reviewed the case and immediately called for an emergency hearing to review the forgery claims before even addressing Karen's injunction. The hearing date came quickly. I barely slept the night before. When I arrived at the courthouse, Karen was already seated at the plaintiff's table. She looked smug, dressed sharply in a tailored beige suit, her attorney beside her flipping through a thick file of documents. She didn't even glance at me as I sat down. I recognized the look. She still thought she was untouchable. Judge Rivera entered and called the room to order. Karen's attorney began by painting me as a nuisance, someone who defied community guidelines and harassed board members. He held up the printed, amended bylaws, as if they were gospel. Then came our turn. Laura stood calmly and laid out our case. First, she presented the official HOA documents on file with the county. No amendments, no color restrictions. Next came the sworn affidavit from the former HOA president confirming that no such rule had ever been approved. Then, the piece de resistance, a signed letter from the Johnsons stating that they were out of the country when Karen claimed they signed the affidavits, along with proof of their travel itinerary. The courtroom went quiet. Judge Rivera examined the documents side by side, his expression turning colder with each passing minute. He lowered his glasses and stared directly at Karen. "These signatures don't even match the Johnsons' official records," he said, holding up the forged affidavits. "Ms. Wilkins, did you witness them sign these documents?" Karen hesitated, then cleared her throat. "They emailed them to me," she said, voice tight. "I printed them out." The judge asked to see the emails. She fumbled with her phone, whispered to her attorney, and claimed she couldn't find them. It was unraveling fast. Judge Rivera was clearly losing patience. Karen's flustered excuse about the missing emails landed with a dull thud in the silent courtroom. He leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "So you're submitting legal affidavits with no verifiable source or chain of custody?" Her attorney tried to interject, but the judge raised a hand to silence him. "And these HOA amendments," he continued, holding up the suspicious documents, "the county has no record of them. Yet here you are, enforcing them as if they're law." Karen straightened in her seat, struggling to reclaim her confidence. "There must be a delay with the filings. We're very diligent about our paperwork," she said. But the cracks were obvious. The smug composure she'd carried into the courtroom was beginning to slide, replaced with defensiveness and a hint of desperation. Judge Rivera didn't wait. This court takes document fraud very seriously, he said, his voice low and measured. I'm ordering a full forensic document examination of everything submitted. We will get to the truth. Karen's attorney requested a short recess. Granted. She stood quickly and followed him out, her heels clicking with urgency on the marble floor. I stayed seated, hard hammering, eyes locked on the documents still lying open on the judge's bench. 30 minutes later, we returned to the courtroom. Karen walked in more slowly this time. Her earlier air of superiority had vanished. Her eyes were red. She whispered to her attorney frantically, hands shaking as she organized the same papers she'd once displayed with smug precision. The forensic examiner, an older man with a calm demeanor and a briefcase full of tools, had finished his preliminary analysis. It didn't take long. He held up the page with the amended HOA bylaws. This page, he began, tapping the corner, is not 5 years old. The paper stock is new. The ink hasn't even fully cured, suggesting it was printed within the past few weeks. The courtroom murmured. Karen stared down at the table. He moved to the affidavits. We conducted a digital signature analysis. The Johnson signatures were lifted from earlier HOA membership forms and digitally inserted into these new documents. Gasps now. Real ones? The judge's face hardened. Karen was visibly shaking. Her attorney no longer looked smug, only tense. I glanced around the courtroom. Even the board members who had come to support her looked uncomfortable now, shifting in their seats, eyes downcast. Judge Rivera stood abruptly. Ms. Wilkins, stand up. Karen hesitated, then slowly rose. Her knees seemed to tremble beneath her suit. The room was frozen. Based on the evidence, the judge said, voice echoing across the high-ceilinged chamber, this court finds sufficient cause to dismiss the injunction against the defendant. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of document forgery, perjury, and fraud. He turned to the bailiff. Take Ms. Wilkins into custody. For a second, Karen didn't move. It was as if she didn't understand. Then her face twisted, a mixture of disbelief and outrage. This is ridiculous, she shouted, her voice cracking. I'm the president of Oakwood Estates. I've given everything to this neighborhood. But the bailiff had already stepped forward. He gently but firmly took her by the arm. Karen stumbled as the handcuffs clicked closed behind her. You can't do this to me, she cried, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The law applies to everyone, Judge Rivera said, unmoved. Even HOA presidents. As Karen was led out of the courtroom, she turned back one last time. Her eyes locked on mine, not with the usual disdain, but with something closer to desperation. This isn't over, she hissed. You'll see. I didn't respond. I just sat there, stunned, relieved, and oddly hollow. Because I realized something in that moment. This had never been just about a door. It had been about standing up to someone who believed she was above consequence. And finally, she wasn't. As the heavy courtroom doors closed behind Karen Wilkins, I sat there, barely breathing. The surreal image of her being led away in handcuffs played over and over in my mind. For months, she'd been this immovable force, a shadow over every decision, every lawn ornament, every minor infraction. Now she was gone. The judge had spoken clearly. The law had finally reached a place Karen thought it would never touch. But justice, I quickly learned, leaves behind a strange silence. That night, I walked through Oakwood Estates like I was seeing it for the first time. The same trimmed hedges, the same symmetrical driveways, the same air of forced perfection, but something had shifted. A few neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Others avoided eye contact altogether. No one spoke about it directly, but everyone knew. The queen of the HOA had fallen. The next morning, an email hit the neighborhood listserv. The HOA board will be holding an emergency session regarding interim leadership. It was signed by the board secretary, not Karen. The message was short, neutral, and completely devoid of the usual condescending tone. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something better. Still, I wasn't ready to let my guard down. Karen may have been in custody, but the culture she created didn't vanish with her arrest. At the emergency session, held at the community center and packed with residents, you could feel the tension. The remaining board members sat at the long folding table, looking like schoolchildren called to the principal's office. No one dared sit in the president's seat. After some hesitant discussion, it was agreed that a temporary leadership team would be installed until an election could be held. I expected more pushback, more people defending Karen, but surprisingly, many began to share their own experiences. A couple timidly admitted they'd been fined for shade variance in flower beds. One elderly man said his recycling bins had been cited for visual clutter. Everyone had a story. We just hadn't been talking. That night, I got a knock at the door. It was Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, back from their trip and looking more awake than I'd ever seen them. They handed me a small envelope. "We wanted you to have this," Mrs. Johnson said. Inside was a handwritten thank you note. "For standing up when no one else could," it read. I was stunned. For so long, I'd felt alone. Now, something else was settling in, respect. Not just from them, but from others who had watched quietly, wondering if the rules could ever be questioned. But Karen wasn't done yet. At her initial bail hearing, the judge set her bond at $25,000 and ordered her to surrender her passport. Her attorney argued she wasn't a flight risk, but after the digital forgery evidence, no one was taking chances. She didn't post bail immediately. For a few days, she sat in jail. During that time, her name was removed from the HOA's administrative portal. An interim treasurer was appointed. The board sent out a survey, an actual survey, asking residents how the association could improve. It was almost laughable, but in a way, it was progress. One morning, I received a letter from Karen's attorney. Not an apology. A warning. It accused me of defamation and slanderous mischaracterizations. My attorney laughed it off. "Empty threats," she said. "She's panicking." But I didn't take it lightly. Karen had lost power, but people like her rarely go quietly. For now, the door remained unpainted. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted the final act to be deliberate. A statement. When I finally opened that can of navy blue, I wanted to be sure the war was truly over. And deep down, I suspected the final chapter hadn't been written yet. 2 weeks after Karen's arrest, the neighborhood finally exhaled. You could feel it in the air, less clipped, less cold. The board had held a transparent emergency election. For the first time in years, multiple residents actually ran for leadership positions. People who had once stayed silent suddenly found their voices. The woman who used to jog past my house without making eye contact stopped to wave. Another neighbor brought me cookies. I guess that was our way of saying, "We saw. We know. Thank you." But I wasn't looking for recognition. I just wanted normalcy, and the chance to live in my home without fear of arbitrary punishment. My attorney kept me updated. Karen had been formally charged with 3 counts of document fraud, 2 of forgery, and 1 count of perjury. Her trial was scheduled for the fall. Until then, she remained free on bail, though her presence had vanished entirely from Oakwood Estates. No emails. No memos. No threats. Still, I found myself looking over my shoulder. Some habits die hard. I half expected her white SUV to come creeping around the corner, clipboard in hand. But all I saw were kids riding scooters, neighbors walking dogs, and a silence that finally felt peaceful, not oppressive. And then came the day I'd been waiting for. It was early morning. Clear skies. A perfect Saturday. I went to the garage, opened the can of navy blue paint that had waited patiently on the shelf for over 3 months, and got to work. Each brushstroke felt like a reclaiming of space, of sanity. With every inch, I felt lighter. I wasn't just painting a door. I was erasing her shadow. Around noon, I stepped back and admired the finished result. The color was deep and elegant, rich without being loud. It matched my shutters perfectly. It looked right. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of this house again. Not just for how it looked, but for what it stood for. That afternoon, a small envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sentence, typed on plain white paper. "You've humiliated me, but I'm not finished." No signature. No date. But I knew the handwriting on the envelope. I'd seen it too many times on HOA notices. Karen. I brought the note to my attorney. She took one look and sighed. "She's trying to intimidate you. Let's report it and move on." So we did. Filed it away with the rest of the evidence. But that night, I didn't sleep well. The next week passed without incident. Then another. The board continued its reforms. They even revised the official HOA documents, removing vague language and posting everything publicly. Residents started decorating freely again. One guy installed a gnome village in his front yard. No one blinked. The grip Karen had once held so tightly was gone. Still, I never let my guard fully down. People like Karen don't disappear. They bide their time. And while I hoped the courts would deliver final justice, I had a feeling she wasn't done trying to prove she still mattered. But I was no longer afraid. I had already faced her lies, her power plays, even her forged documents, and I didn't back down. Not once. I won because I stood up. Because I refused to be bullied by someone who believed rules were hers to twist. So if she comes back someday with more threats or more games, I'll be ready. And I'll answer the door behind a deep navy blue, bold, undeniable, and entirely mine. What's the wildest HOA rule you've ever heard? Share your experiences below. I read every one. If you like this story, don't miss our next one, another insane HOA tale where a man's backyard deck led to a full-scale investigation. Click here to watch it now.